But small farmers don't have the advantage that they used to have. If they're growing GM crops, they can't use their own seed.
No, that's a matter for consideration. I think you have to be careful about this argument. In the Western countries, the big companies who develop these seeds make it a condition of sale that the farmers pay a technology fee and undertake not to replant the seeds from the crops. But that's in the West. Other countries can do what they like, and there's nothing the matter with the seeds themselves. This is a commercial decision and a commercial contract which the companies in the West make with their
So it's not the same as hybrids where you can't...
No, not at all. I mean, there may be hybrids as well,
yeah,
which would then complicate the issue, but there is only a commercial reason why you can't replant the seeds, not a biological reason, unless they're hybrids. So that depends then on how you arrange your commercial affairs.
But then that comes back to the dominance of for the food production systems by such a small number of large, powerful companies. Isn't that something that we should be concerned about?
Well, it doesn't concern me, but it might concern other people. From what I have seen of those countries, those companies, they seem to me upstanding and ethical, but other people may take a different view. The way of dealing with it, I think, is to open the market to other people, and you do that by making the regulation capable of coping with a wider variety of smaller companies, so that the commercial power and the technological power is not so concentrated as it is up to now.
Is it possible to reverse that? Because it seems to have gone an awfully long way.
It's difficult. Well, the British government would clearly like to do it at the present time, they say so. But they have to persuade 26 other countries, only some of whom are persuadable. Other countries are dead against it.
There's a very large proportion of European countries that are,
well,
I believe...
that depends on what you mean by very. A large proportion of the European countries are against it, yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to inquire why.
So despite the opposition to GM crops in Europe, we still have them in the food chain.
Yes.
What are they, and how do they get into the food chain?
How do they get into the food?
Yes,
well, they're food.
Yes, but we have a lot of restrictions on the...
We don't. We have them approved or not by the European Union. There are mechanisms which don't work perfectly well, but they work tolerably well. Compared with the cultivation approvals, the import approvals work rather better, so that we are allowed to import maize and soybeans. We can't effectively import, as I understand it, rapeseed oil, because the Canadians, I say, only some rapeseed oil is approved in Europe, and the Canadians, I think, mix, and so some is approved and some isn't, so we can't import them. But and cotton is not so. Cotton's not a food, so there's not. You're interested to know that Euro notes are made of GM cotton, for example. So cotton is very widespread. Difficult to know how widespread, but at least 50% of all cotton goods are made of GM cotton. But they don't have to be labelled, as nobody knows unless you know the industry. So it's predominantly soybeans and maize,
which are widely used in a whole lot of food products.
Well, people in Europe don't eat much soybean directly. Some have soya milk, which they carefully make from non-GM soybeans, which is increasingly difficult to come by, incidentally. There's lecithin, which is an emulsifier used in chocolates and so on, but most of it goes for cattle feed. And then the human consumption is maize. So it's maize as maize, that's, say, cornflakes, for example, could be, or the oil from maize.
Which is used a lot in cooking.
But also in margarines and various other sort of things. So those are predominant products, and then you get minor products, I say, like chocolates containing emulsifiers made from GM sources and things like that. So those are present, labelled as prescribed by European law if they contain more than 0.9% of adventitious material. Adventitious means not intended. You mustn't deliberately put it in, but if it happens, in spite of your best efforts, as it were, and it's limited to 0.9% for any one ingredient, you don't have to label. So, but there are materials on sale in the shops of a number of countries which are made from GM sources and labelled, and have been for years, and people buy them. So there is willingness on the part of some people, for whatever reason, not well explored what the reasons are, or what the absence of antipathy might be, people buy them. Supermarkets don't leave stuff on the shelves if nobody's buying it. So not everybody's against it by any means, and even if you ask people the question, depending on how you phrase it, you find a range of answers that some people will and some people won't, and some people are not very interested, and blah blah, and it depends which country and so on.
What are the authorities in Europe looking at when they allow in certain genetically modified products?
Oh, they want to know that the plant itself has not been disturbed. So they want to know where the gene is inserted. They want to know what genetically is on either side of the insertion place, and whether any gene function has been disturbed in the plant. They want to know that the nutritional value has not changed, that there's no allergenic factor. Something else. Those sorts of things.
And these are they allow in one particular thing at a time, don't they? They're very.
Oh, each event has to be approved. Yes.
And that takes quite often several. How long is that?
Well, it's not as long as approval. They have only approved 2 plants for Europe ever. One of which has now been withdrawn as being commercially unfeasible. That's the Amphora starch maize, which BASF had got approval on, but they think it's just commercially not a go in Europe. So the only one is BT maize, which is grown, I said, in Spain and some other countries.
And so those controls actually restrict very largely the amount of GM material that comes in, even in the food chain.
No, the food chain is not restricted for those things which are approved. You can import them. In fact, almost all the soy in Europe is GM, except that which is grown in Italy, which is not, and for the relatively small amounts which they can still import from Brazil. But Brazil GM soy is becoming increasingly difficult to get, so much so that the arrangement is, I don't know about the other European countries, in Britain the arrangement has been until now that winter cattle fodder has been GM, and that most of the supermarket chains will accept meat which has been fed GM fodder, GM soy fodder in the wintertime. But they've had, until recently, they've had some sort of agreement with the activist groups that they wouldn't do this for chicken feed. And then 2 years ago, ASDA decided that they would. And they decided to use GM chicken feed. And then last year, Morrison's decided that they're going to use GM chicken feed. And the reason is that the non-GM becomes too expensive, and that the chicken producers feel they can't carry on. And so the question is, will the other supermarkets follow, and if so, when?
So long as it's not horse meat.
Well, the horse meat situation is different, not the GM issue.
Yeah. So is there any chance that actual sort of GM material can find its way into milk and eggs and...
Well, it depends what you call GM material. Do you mean, can you detect the material that cows eat does not appear in the meat? The only way you know that the meat is, I don't even know whether you do know this, but the only way you might know that the meat came from a cow which had been fed GM fodder would be through a paper trail. I don't think there is any. Let's say the cow,
yes.
you know, the farmer has to say what the cow's fed and blah blah, so that you can follow what happens to the cow and its meat. I don't think you can actually detect anything in the meat, or if you can detect fragments. I mean, what does it matter? As I said, there's 150,000 kilometres of DNA that you eat every meal, and you're going to pick on this bit. And what does it matter? I mean, what about all the other genes that you're eating? Why aren't you interested in them, as it were?
Some people are concerned, that's why.
Well, they're concerned about this one because somebody's been leading them by the nose to be concerned, I would submit. I think they might show some concern for the rest of the 150,000 kilometres they're eating with every meal.
So, but do we really need GM crops in the UK? There's no shortage of food, and we're in an island, so we can actually control what comes in a far greater sort of way than we could in mainland Europe.
We don't live in a society where we decide centrally what people need. We live in a market economy where we put things on the market if they are judged to be fit and properly put on the market, and let the consumer decide what they want to eat. So is there a need? The only way you'll find out if there's a need is put it on the market and see whether people buy
But
it.
the consumers won't really choose. It's the farmers who really would
No,
make the choice.
because you import stuff or grown in other places, so you put it on the market, and do people buy it? And the answer is yes, they do. If you put GM soy oil on the market, people buy it.
Because it's cheap.
Now, you're giving a reason why it may be cheap. Is that why they buy it?
I would suggest it is.
Well, you may be right, but have you any evidence?
No.
Well, there you are, you see. So you put it on the market and people buy it. My wife bought a small car a couple of years ago, which was cheap. Was that why she bought it?
I have no idea.
Yes,
It was.
it was.
Sure
In that
it
case.
was.
So there you are. But you see, she could have bought a more expensive one, but there really wasn't any point. So the question is, you're assuming why people buy it, and you may be right. But that's not the point. The point is you put stuff on the market in this country and people buy it, or they don't. So one company comes out with one sort of phone and another one comes out with another sort of phone, and they fight it out. Do we need any more phones? Of course not. Should we stop importing them? Certainly not.
So who's actually supporting GM crops and why are they doing it?
What do you mean by supporting?
Why are they promoting the production of GM crops against, what, for instance, the Environment Minister? And
Well, because it's a sensible thing to do, because people recognise that in our complex society we live by our wits and by our ability to solve our very complex and increasingly complex problems, including population problems and all the others that we have, and that we need every bit of wit about us in order to do so. And one of the things that we have at the present time is the possibility of a severely growing world population which needs to be fed. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why the population is not currently fed as well as it is. Wastage and spoilage and poor transport, and everybody knows what these problems are. But there is also the problem of simply bulk supply, and the more people you have, the more stuff you need. And at the same time, people don't want to plough up. Is that plough again? You see that they use the word plough in city terms just to mean agriculture, but they don't want to increase the agricultural land at the cost of wild land and recreational land. And yet in the end we need more food. So what are we going to do? We've got to increase our efficiency somehow. And there are all sorts of ways of doing this, I agree. This is not the only way, but this is one of them. And if we don't do this, we'll find that we are short.
but you have said earlier that in fact GM crops don't necessarily have higher yields.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was that GM crops bred for higher yield have not yet hit the market in a big way, but the yields tend to be higher because the deleterious factors are lessened, and so you don't lose so much in the field from pests. That the net effect is a higher yield.
Is a higher yield.
So whether you get the higher yield because intrinsically it's better and produces more, or because you lose less, is a semantic argument. But either way, you get a higher yield.
We know there's a lot there is some support, but why do people then oppose the use of the growth of GM crops?
That's very interesting, and it's most interesting because really I'm no better equipped to answer that than most other people are. But it's clear there are, it's clear to me, I have to make it clear to whoever may watch this video that this is clear to me, it may not be clear to other people. It's clear to me that there are really two sorts of people who are objecting. There are those people who object because they believe in some way that these things are bad, or the technology is bad, and there are those people who object because it confers some sort of advantage on them. The advantage might be a political advantage, it might give them a vehicle for protest. There are almost professional protesters in this world who need issues about which to protest, and clearly this is a very good issue. It's easy to frighten people with this one, and the people who have used this as a protest vehicle have been very, very effective with it. and one must hand it to them that they have known their business very well, how to do this. I think they're beginning to lose steam now because they have been crying wolf for such a long time and nothing has happened that people are beginning to be rather less impressed. But there was a time when they were very scary headlines in the newspapers, some newspapers, and people really did get worried and they were worked up about it. I guess some people still are. So there are those people. I think there are commercial interests. One might cite some sections of the organic movement have as clearly trying to gain advantage by adopting an anti-GM position and making it as difficult as possible for GM activities to be pursued. And so they demand ever greater separation distances between themselves and anybody else, to the extent that some people have said that even the Atlantic is not wide enough to stop pollen grains going. So that's clearly not intended to encourage GM, but the organic movement feels that this is a way of supporting their own activities. Maybe they feel their activities need supporting, but whatever it may be. And then there are those people who actually believe. I think those people who, well, I was going to say perhaps don't understand the science, who feel deep down, and we know the names of some of them, I don't need to mention them, who feel that this is not a natural thing for us to be doing. In spite of the fact, I mentioned earlier on that we have been using high energy radiation and carcinogenic chemicals to breed plants, and many of our existing food plants are produced in that sort of way and have been for nearly 100 years. Nobody has batted an eyelid. And yet all of a sudden we have this technique which is suddenly the work of the devil. There must be some reason why people have adopted this position. And I don't know what it is, but it's not the first time. There was, you may remember that in the beginning of the 19th century there were riots in London over vaccination. People said that this was essentially the work of the devil, and there were cartoons of people with little cows coming out of their noses because it was cowpox that was being used as a vaccine. And there were riots, I think, in Paris at the time of milk pasteurisation because they were going to destroy milk. And I don't know, but there were objections, even the best one I came across was objections in Oklahoma City in the 19th century to the installation of the electric telegraph because it would only bring brag news of gambling from New Orleans. So there are people who object. People who object because they misunderstand. So there was the autism and the MMR vaccine objection. There's the mobile phone objection. There's always people who half understand, who half don't understand, who pick up something and then run with it, and it's very difficult to get them detached again. So there are all sorts of people there who believe for one form or another. And I think those people will just go on believing. I think there's nothing one can say to them. They're not really interested in evidence in the usual form because evidence is clearly the work of the devil itself, and therefore it doesn't help to change their mind. But the opportunists will see other opportunities, and when other opportunities present themselves which are more attractive, they'll jump.